Did you shut
I'm
off?
doing a part 3. We're
Okay.
good.
Here's the thing that people need to understand, and I'm just going to be real. And I'm a strength coach, and I think it matters. I know this. I would not be standing here if it wasn't for my high school strength conditioning program, because I wasn't good enough to get where I needed to go to school for free, to be here talking to you today without the weight room.
You went to Wake Forest.
But just remember this. Every sport we watch on TV was being played before anybody lifted weights. So let's just remember, when we get into all this stuff about my guys don't lift, I coached 2 of the greatest football players in the NFL, and I actually coached them both. One I got to coach in the pros and college, and one I coached in college. Not the greatest lifters. Not, and I'm being generous when I say that.
Meaning what? Their technique wasn't the best?
Meaning that they didn't like lifting weights.
Gotcha.
And maybe they came and maybe they didn't. And they're going to the Hall of Fame in their sport as 2 of the greatest that ever did it. So at the end of the day is, what can we do to at least find a way that there's some type of value? And what that value may be, it may look different than the way I need to train, to the way you need to train, Zach, to the way Coach Collodi needs to train. But there is some ways to build that experience. It has to start with basics, like we were talking about. You have to have fundamentals. You know, we got a guy, hey, we're going to go do squats today. Kid can't do a body weight squat, right? Kid can't do a plank. Kid can't do an iso.
Block 0.
And again, I mean, I'm not saying I'm anti-lifting. I'm anti-preparing them to lift. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can't ask a kid to get under a bench press. And I know some people say, well, that's why you do dumbbells. I want a kid to be able to do a push-up. Because if they can't do a push-up and they can't control their own weight, I don't care how much external load we give them. And again, I'm not saying I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that, but there's just certain ways of how I believe long-term athletic development looks in strength training than others. And I'm not saying they're wrong. If they can provide methodologies and their kids look safe, I'm okay with that. But I mean, for me, I know when I'm dealing with athletes, I'm not in a rush, because if they're expedient and they excel at their sport, no matter what I do is a benefit. It doesn't matter if they lift a weight, do a push-up, or swing from a rope. Anything that I do general physical fitness-wise is going to enhance their abilities because they've never been exposed to it.
Yes.
So, and we've all know the United States is backwards. It's skill development, skill development, skill development. Oh, and maybe the kid knows how to gallop. Maybe he knows what. Half these kids can't skip, but yet they're, top flight elite juniors in their sport.
As much as people hate on the Russians and, what the Soviets did and the drugs, I always say, but you know what? They were amazing at developing a system from the youth level.
But if you study them, what did they all do? They all got thrown into a pot. And as they looked at their basic skills, then they started to differentiate where they're, and then they look at the parents' genetics, where do they see these people flowing? But it's even like, the Asian people that wake up every day and do Tai Chi and they do exercise. I just saw one in class, they're doing exercises in their class, sitting at their seat, their teachers.
Oh yeah, the music thing.
Throwing it around. I mean, again, I'm not saying anybody's right or wrong. I'm just saying that we just got to have an open mind and try to figure out what's the best practices for what's going on today. Just getting them out of their chairs and making them put their phones in their desk for an hour. And just teaching them to walk upright, looking up, not down.
Well, if we look just, looking behind you with kettlebells, we got the old dumbbells. I think to myself how we see less of those things, these tools in gyms. I use a ton of dumbbells and kettlebells with our athletes. I just see we see now sprint, jump, and barbell lifts. Like they don't.
Well, I mean, the sprint.
Maybe
jump,
we're not seeing it because it's not being filmed.
Well, like we were talking about too, as I see in my role now, most weight rooms are rack based. Yep. So there's not a lot of accessory pieces. So what does that mean? What are you going to do? You're going to do rack based exercise, and then let's face it, what's simple? Go out inside, sprint and jump. And that's lifting weight, and that's strength training too. Like
sprinting, I look at as strength training.
There's no one that's not going to say that. If you're saying that's not part of strength training, I think that's wrong. Like I knew we had a particular athlete that I coached the NFL that his main routes as a wide receiver was a go route, which is a straight sprint, and he was our kick and punt returner. I'm not going to do a lot of leg work in season with that guy because I know what his volumes are on the practice with that types of demands. And that was even before we got into the GPS and we were making those realizations.
What about like, you know, just like with the dumbbell work and stuff, what were some of the things you did for your own training and also looking back to what you did with athletes that you still think is important today? Because as we're saying, we think, hey, this has a time and place depending on who. Like we get older.
What do you mean? I'm like, again, we have, you know, you have the single leg debate versus bilateral debate, right? Do you have to squat? Do you have to do this? And again, like I tell people, I'm always going to, depending on, I shouldn't say that, depending on the age, I'm always going to probably program at least one bilateral squat in a program. I've learned through a long time ago, and I give Mike Boyle credit for this because I used to be a back squatting fool in the 90s and resonated more towards implementing more front squatting because of a lot of conversation and what Mike Boyle was putting out at that time period. And I know he's even now resonated into like rear foot elevated squats. And I think there's a lot of value to that exercise, especially at the professional or high college level but I'm always it's going to be hard for me not to believe there isn't value in bilateral squatting and preferably with athletes, a front squat.
I love the front squat.
It's good for posture. It has a little bit more of that athletic component. It ties into a lot of things that you can do off the weight room and in the weight room. But going back to dumbbells, I mean, again, as you're building, and we want to talk about, we want to be an athletic-based strength program. Well, barbells and bilateral stuff is one part of the plan. Dumbbells, especially upper body-wise, is critical for independent limb training and also looking to ways to help compensation issues and protect yourself in ways because you can adjust your hand positioning and stuff like that. But one of the things that we would do is look at different movement patterns, and I use it today, and I think it's cool where we would do, like say for example, we could do this weekly for a 4-week block, or you could do this for each stage for 2 week, 4 week, or whatever, is varied alternate arm type work with your dumbbell press. So let's just say traditional bench press. We would start week 1 what I call high-low benching. So it's not a seesaw. I call that a different exercise. But you're stabilizing both, and then you do a full complete rep while this arm stabilizes.
Yep, I love that one.
And then you do whatever the reps is.
Alternating
then
bench.
The next cycle or the next way is called low-high. So now you're in the contracted position.
That's
so now
nice.
you have to stay, because if you relax here in a way, you have to stay contracted so you don't lose tension on the muscles, so you don't want any muscle pulls or tears. So now I go low-high. So these are going to be harder because you're in this iso, quasi-iso positions. Then the third phase is pure single arm. So now you've got to brace a little bit more core work.
Yes.
And then the 4th week is I got both dumbbells in both hands, traditional, and I'm going to go for a big weight for that rep range that we hit. And generally, I'm going to go with dumbbells between 8 and 15 in a training plan, and then learning from Matt Wenning with lighter weights. I'll go 25 plus.
I love that.
For high volume conditioning work. But for me, if you're into the Wenning warm up, and Matt talks about changing angles, a great way to do a Wenning warm up with that deal is set 1, go high low, set 2 low high, set 3 single arm, and then set 4 just go for like a set of 50. And I've done that in part of a traditional Wenning warm up with really cool success. And I like it because I hit 4 different ways of hitting the same exercise so I don't get bored. And that's the biggest thing, right? With most athletes, even the best ones,
they get bored.
Bored fast. So you want to change. Early on, they're not as bored because they're learning. It's a lot of teaching. But if you've had an athlete for numerous years in your program, they're going to get stale. And that's what I remember when I was in the 80s and 90s, because we didn't do enough variation. People would tell you, if you've been in someone's strength program for 3 or 4 years, they weren't going to make much more progress because we weren't doing our job of changing the adaptations and changing variations. And that's when we started leveling things, introducing different types of apparatuses or different types of methods. That's one good thing about with learning stuff from Louis Simmons with dynamic effort. And like you can build this absolute strength base early, and then all of a sudden you introduce the dynamic effort method with the same exercises, and the kids think it's a eureka moment. And then you build in, you know, now all of a sudden then you go from traditional barbell lifts, and now all of a sudden that same kid now gets exposed to, you know, 6 different squat bars.
Yep.
If we're talking just traditional bilateral movement. But then again, it's the same thing with your independent limb work with your dumbbells versus barbell. So,
House, what else you got before we shut it down, my bro? This.
well, I think the best person in the world's walking in. I thought, yeah, here she comes. So my wife's, she's got her virtual. She's been boxing on virtual.
All right. Well,
so we're getting ready to shut it off. My
Yep.
wife just walked in to meet the coaches. I appreciate you guys coming, Zach. I
Big
needed
house.
you to come to the
I
Mecca.
love Big House.
The
Wow.
Mecca, baby. Thanks, Coach.